for me, it's really one of the most important parts of any story, which is just like understanding what bits of the story are the bits that are going to emotionally resonate with your reader. And I think that they're the bits that the reader's going to be left thinking about at the end of the book, and it's going to be coming away from. And so that's the emotional journey usually of your protagonist, but really rooted in their relationships with other people, and how that develops, and the layers of complexity underneath that. And I think that really, for me, is a starting point of all great storytelling, and everything else: plot, structure, characterization, all of that kind of stuff. It comes from there. For me, it's the central point that you begin with, and everything else is a consequence of that.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 148 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me this week is my co-host, my bestie from Midwesty, the queen of my days, Greta Kelly. How you doing, girl?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I don't have a cool nickname like the queen of my days, but you know, I'll make do.
We'll have to figure something out. We'll workshop it at Worldcon this year. We'll do a poll.
We'll just go around to all these random ass people.
Yeah.
And be like, what do you think? Well, if you want to support Greta, the queen of my days, with her book, The Queen of Days, then go check out her novel, which is out now in all formats. Fantastic heist story with a fucked up family getting into all kinds of thievery and shenanigans. It's great.
And of course, go support Adrian in his book, Mushroom Blues, for all of your murder, mayhem, and mushroomy goodness, now in the anniversary edition. It's beautiful. You'll love it.
I hope so. At least Nick Eames had a very heartwarming
yes, it was
forward.
a really nice, really
and
good
then shit gets really dark, but yeah. As well, you can support MJ in her quest to quit her day job, so go check out the Tales of Tomorrow duology, starting with Among Thieves, and then book 2, The Thick-Ass Thieves. If you want to just give her a little kickback, help her out, and enjoy a complete duology from start to finish. It's fantastic. As well, if you want to support SFF Addicts, you can check out our Patreon for a ton of cool extras like bonus episodes, author readings, and more. You can find the links for that in the description below. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now joining us once again is the wonderful Nicholas Binge. Nick Binge, best-selling author of Ascension, Professor Everywhere, and his latest novel, Dissolution. Welcome back to the show, buddy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me back. Looking forward to it.
Me too. And this is a part 2 of our 2-part chat with Nick, so I just recommend checking out part 1 to get to know him better. Today, though, we're taking a journey to the center of the heart as we delve into a masterclass on finding the emotional core. Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Welcome to Transference, where death and sickness are but a distant memory. Nicholas Five Boroughs is a sicko, someone that takes on others' illnesses. In a city where diseases can be transferred, the rich buy longer lives without pain, and the poor get a short life of constant sickness. Brought back from the brink of death by his friend Brian Meadowhearth, or maybe the invisible hand of an outside actor, Nick finally gets the chance to try and change things, to finally stop the whole disease transfer network. Tensions escalate as Nick infiltrates a higher society he doesn't understand, and starts to fall for Dorothy Sungate, the very person he needs to manipulate to be successful. And between run-ins with a talking cat, genetically modified humans, and a robotic police force, the world around him just keeps getting stranger. Can Nicholas tear down the disease transfer architecture? And how much of his humanity is he willing to bargain along the way? A dystopian vision of healthcare and a market economy, Transference will appeal to fans of Red Rising, Blade Runner, and the BioShock franchise. Soon to be a complete duology with the release of Transcendence in the summer of 2025. Transference by Ian Patterson is available now in paperback and ebook. Get your copy today. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts. And so to get this masterclass started, what does this idea of an emotional core, because you pitched us on this topic, what does it mean to you in the context of storytelling?
So I think for me, it's really one of the most important parts of any story, which is just like understanding what bits of the story are the bits that are going to emotionally resonate with your reader. And I think that they're the bits that the reader's going to be left thinking about at the end of the book, and it's going to be coming away from. And so that's the emotional journey usually of your protagonist, but really rooted in their relationships with other people, and how that develops, and the layers of complexity underneath that. And I think that really, for me, is a starting point of all great storytelling and everything else: plot, structure, characterization, all of that kind of stuff. It comes from there. For me, it's the central point that you begin with, and everything else is a consequence of that. As far as I'm concerned, and I think if you're writing a book that you're kind of struggling with the plot of, or where it's going, or things like that, I think in experiences that I've had, and we talked about this in the first episode, that I do a lot of teaching, and I teach creative writing as well. And experience that I've had working with students who are kind of trying to work out what their book is, more often than not, bringing it back down to like, okay, but what is the emotional story that you're trying to tell here? Let's talk about that first. And often I'll realize that they haven't nailed that down yet. They're not entirely sure, and all the other consequences of the story not quite working are symptoms of that, And so it's finding that central emotional journey of your book is really the core of any great story.
So how do you think this idea of an emotional core, is it related to theme in your mind, or are there differences to how you view those two elements?
I think there are different. I think they're related, absolutely, but I don't think they're the same thing. I think themes can be very widespread. You can have political themes, you can have social themes running through your book. You can have all sorts of different kinds of themes that can interplay with that emotional journey, but aren't necessarily that emotional journey, right? If you're writing a book that has deep, political themes, for example, right, you're going to have a lot of plot points that explore that those elements. But underneath that, I think that whoever your narrator is, whatever vessel you're using to tell this story, still needs to have an underlying emotional core for a reader to connect with, for it to be a really resonant story. And that's gonna impact and relate to the theme, but it's gonna be a separate thing to what the theme actually is.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to get your personal takes about some examples, give listeners a better sense of this topic and kind of like emotional core as an idea. What are some examples of books, media that you believe strongly exemplify that?
Yeah, sure. So I think that so I'm gonna use a book that I was reading just recently, because I was just thinking about it, and I'm rereading it at the moment because I'm reading it for my other podcast, which is an accidental plug.
Links in the description below.
Yeah, the links will be at the bottom. Which is Planetfall by Emma Newman, which is a wonderful book. I don't know if you've read it. And it's kind of got these big sci-fi ideas, and it's about like these people who built a ship to go and find God in space, basically, and land on a planet. But the thing that makes that book sing, and the thing that sticks in my mind at the end of that book, is not really the big sci-fi ideas, but it is the emotional core of the protagonist, who we're kind of in a situation where something happened 20 years ago when they first landed on this planet, and the kind of the guilt that they feel by association, how it plagues them, how they react to things, and how it kind of impacts every single area of their life and all of their decisions, that slowly creeps up and develops as the book goes on. It makes the book so powerful. And I think Emma Newman does that really, really well in her writing. She really explores the inner emotional journeys of characters, which I think is fascinating. And then even books that are that have so many themes and are about so many other things, actually, one of my favorite books, just because it's so maximalist and so filled with ideas and crazy concepts, is House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. But I think one of the things that makes that book really special, as well as everything else, is there is a real emotional core to the family that move into the house and the obsession of the main character that slowly builds up over time, and the way that he deals with his family and his children and his wife and all of that kind of stuff, that I think is really fascinating, because at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. I think is what makes us human, and we can talk about that a bit more later on. But those were kind of two examples that came to mind of books that did a lot of other things, but I think what made them readable and what made them sing was an emotional core that underlay kind of the bottom of it.
Yeah. I have Planetfall on my TBR, but I haven't read the other. I haven't read that or the other one, so definitely gonna have to check those out. But
yeah, and when you were talking, I was thinking, oh God, Silence of the Lambs, like classic horror, but also the emotional core of can Hannibal be redeemed, or will Clarice be completely, pulled to the dark side? So it's not just
like what the most impactful thing in Silence of the Lambs, the thing that people remember and the people that talk about, right, is not really the serial killer, not really the kind of horror moments and things like that. It's those conversations between Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter and Clarice in those scenes, because what's happening is Hannibal delving into her emotional core, her background, the things that scare her, the things that all of those, and those are the bits that make the film sing. You take those out, it's just another kind of slasher serial killer film,
right? And that those two characters are a really good example of just like how, when it comes to the emotional core, there's a lot of talk online about readers who prefer plot-driven books or character-driven books, and I personally, like, from my perspective of what I've seen, I feel like character-driven books has become more of the norm and the thing that people gravitate towards. Why is that important? Like, why are characters important to having that sort of clearly defined emotional push and pull at play in the story?
I think characters are everything, and I actually think that, in my opinion, and people may disagree with me, I think that setting up character-driven versus plot-driven books is a false dichotomy, and I think that ultimately plot is character and should be based on character. And if you are sitting down and you are plotting a cool plot beats in a book, and you are not doing it based on the inner emotional journeys of the characters and why they're doing the things that they're doing, then you're approaching storytelling from completely the wrong angle. I think that I think the reason that we as a species love storytelling and invest in storytelling is because we look for characters to connect with and to empathize with and to share those journeys with, so we can have kind of a process of catharsis if it's tragedy, or even in a comedy, right? It's characters to share those moments of joy and humor with. And if you take those away, or they're relatively flat characters, then it doesn't matter what cool stuff you have them doing. It does not matter. It's just not going to be that cool, and it's not going to be that impactful, right? I could write you a whole book of flat 2D emotionless characters doing the coolest martial arts and acrobatics and big wars and action scenes and all of these kinds of things, and it ultimately wouldn't be as interesting as you might think it would be if we're not invested in those characters' emotional journeys and why they're doing the things that they're doing. And so I think all good books kind of have to be character-driven books. Otherwise, you're kind of missing the point of storytelling.
Just a bunch of cool ass action set pieces.
Yeah, just a set piece after set piece, like
fight after fight.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. Like from like being a teacher yourself or have a career in teaching, like how do you tell your students to like look past just the basic chronology of events at play and actually find the emotional core within those events?
I think it's the primary thing to do is really dig into character, right? And to find out who your characters are and what they care about and what they're interested in. And usually the first place to look is relationships when you're looking at emotions, right? And most of the most important emotions in our life are to do with our relationships with other people, whether that's familial relationships, children, parents, siblings, or romantic relationships or friendship relationships, And I think it's to look for me, I think the most interesting emotional cores come from looking for complexity and contradiction within those relationships. Like, it's very easy to be like, oh, this person loves this other person, or they're best friends, or, this person hates them, or even that, like, they did something wrong and they feel guilty about it. It's like, okay, that's one layer, but adding more to that and looking at the contradictions. So one of my favorite films, I think is a wonderful film, is just because I was referencing this when I was talking with a student the other day, is Whiplash.
Dude, such a good movie.
It's an amazing film, right? And I think what makes that film so amazing is the mentor-mentee relationship in that. It's so complex and fucked up in the best way, but like it's this relationship of like pride and expectation and disappointment, and the climax of that film is wonderful because it leaves you with such a complex note of like there is pride there, but you don't want there to be pride there because you don't want that relationship to have worked, and that complexity is what carries that film entirely, right? And I think my advice is always and I think in real life, all of the relationships that we have with people, even with people that we love and care for, have layers of complexity to them. They have, people that you, love as friends or romantic partners or how whoever they may be, right? There's going to be there's going to be things that you resent there. There's going to be things that annoy you. There's going to be things that you don't talk about, right? There's going to be things that you kind of both agree that you don't talk about. There's going to be all of these kind of layers underneath. And I think if you want to work out what a character's emotional core is, you need to dig into those relationships and find out where they are, and then look for plot moments, essentially, that are going to bring them to the surface, that are going to bring them to the forefront. I think, we were talking about dissolution in the last episode. And for me, finding Maggie's emotional core was largely about her relationship with her husband, this relationship that in her mind was based on 50 years of trust and love, right? And the central point of tension at the beginning is this implication that he's got this whole life that he has lived, or this whole complex stuff that's going on inside his head that she didn't know about, which immediately forces her to go like, well, I love him and I want him back and I want to care for him. But at the same time, how did I not know about all of this? What did I not even know my husband? And what does that say about me? And what does that say about, and so the whole way through, you've got this constant tension of her emotion of both wanting to find out the truth and the answer, right, desperately, and wanting to save her husband because she loves him, but also questioning everything that's going on at the same time because she doesn't really trust herself more than anything. And I think if you have that to cling on to, the plot falls out of it. The what happens next kind of almost inevitably kind of finds its way onto the page.
Yeah, this is good. Let's dig into character a little bit more because I love this track that we're on a character level. So you've been talking about character relationships and how that kind of allows for the development of plot.
Mm-hmm.
But on a fundamental level, when it comes to an individual character, their wants, goals, emotional states, their beginning point and like a potential end point. How do you kind of go about establishing the foundation for that character such that you can at least sense a satisfying and logical emotional through line over the course
Yeah.
of a story?
Yeah, I think, part of it is like I said, developing. I don't think you can separate a character's identity from their relationships. I think we are built upon our relationships with other people, and I think you need an understanding of their relationships to understand who they are. I think you can sit down and do the basic thing of writing their kind of wants and needs and desires and fears and those kinds of things and starting to explore that. But I think where characters get really interesting is, and I kind of mentioned this before with relationships, but I think it works for characters as well, is in their contradictions, because we're as humans, we're highly contradictory people. I give you a perfect example, which is, um I truly believe, like, and I mean genuinely, right? I truly believe morally, and environmentally, and for a variety of different reasons, that we as human beings really should not anymore, and have no need to be eating meat. We should all be vegetarians, and that would be the best thing for the planet. That would be the best thing for our moral souls, and all of these sorts of things. I do believe that, right? And yet I eat meat, and and like, because it's built into me culturally, and I enjoy it, and all of these sorts of things, and I kind of hate myself for it, but like, it is what it is. But like, we're constantly filled with all these contradictions of things that we want to do and things that we believe about ourselves that don't actually quite match up to the actions that we take in real life, and all of these sorts of things, right? And I think being honest about that, about your characters, and looking for like, okay, where are your contradictions, and what does that say about you as a character? What things do you believe about yourself that maybe don't bear out into reality in terms of your actions? What are things that you want to do that you're not capable of doing, and what does that say about you as a character? And those are places to dig in and find, where there is kind of an emotional core that you can start to build out of, rather than just a very simple, like, they want this or they need this or things like that.
Yeah, because that contradiction thing kind of plays into internal representation and external representation of a character. The ways in which you can play around with dialogue and internal thoughts and that kinds of thing. Actions and the way they act around certain people, where relationships kind of feed back into it. They act this way towards their spouse. They act this way towards their mother. What does that say about them as well?
Exactly. And how that might change, and how they might, and they might be in a position, and they might be saying things and acting this way. And internally, while they're saying and acting in a certain way, they might be consciously being like, why am I acting in this way? This is really stupid. Like, everyone's been at a party somewhere where they're talking to someone, and they're literally in their head, like, oh my God, why am I saying these things? Like,
or why am I talking to this person?
Why am I even talking to this person?
Why am I at this party?
Yeah, exactly.
But even just like red flags, like, we've all been on that date where the person you're with is really mean to the waiter, and you're like, ooh, like, this says something about this person, and I don't like it.
But he's got a 6-pack, Greta. Oh.
That does not resolve everything. But when it comes to your own process, like, because this is a lot of stuff, there's a lot of nuance that goes into the characters that you build. Do you always know this going in? Because I thought you said you were a discovery writer. So how much of this are you discovering along the way?
So I find it easiest to discover most of the stuff that I've just talked about, this kind of contradiction and stuff. I find it easiest to discover that as I'm writing, discover like the process of writing. And so I kind of put them in situations and explore, whether it is talking to the person at the party, or whether it's, whatever they happen to be. Put them in situations of tension. Put them in situations ideally where like a want and a need like present itself in some way, shape, or form. Like, again, to go back to my book, the thing that happens at the beginning of Dissolution, which we talked about last episode, is somebody shows up and basically offers Maggie exactly the thing that she's always wanted, which is, you can have your husband back, right? So she's been put in that situation where like a genius showed up and granted her one wish. And that is the perfect situation to then really dig into all of the feelings that that brings out, right? And it's that process of writing.
It's such like a potent, packed wish to be like, one sentence, do you want your husband back? And it's like, that opens up a whole broad swath of possibilities.
Yeah. Do you want your husband back, but you will have to do this, you know? And I think that's an easy thing to put your characters in. Like, let me give you your most perfect wish that you've always wanted, but you have to do this. What do you do? What does that say about your character? What does that let you explore as you kind of write out that scene and you explore that scene? I think you'll learn so much about your character. There's a classic, another good tension one is there's a I can't remember who gave the advice. I'm not going to be able to say who it is because I cannot remember, but I'm stealing this advice.
We'll attribute it to someone. You can claim it in the comments.
Yeah. I'll claim it. It's mine. It's mine now. Which is a great piece of writing advice when you're stuck with a character, which is to ask the question, what would this character like absolutely never do? What is the one thing that they would absolutely 100% never, ever do? Okay, now make them do it. What happens? Like what happens
You're
to
just
them?
playing Chekhov's gun with your characters.
Yeah. Right. And it's a great way to explore like what do they do? How do they react? How do they feel about themselves? How do they feel about others? Do they hide it? Do they admit it to people? Do they, all of these sorts of things is a great way to explore who your character is, by putting them in these points of tension and these positions of tension, to just see how they react. It's basically the equivalent of just like, slowly putting clamps on a character and just squeezing them and just seeing what comes out.
This is where writers show off their like fucked up side. Torture your characters. It's
what do
a
you
lot
mean?
Of fun.
We're all well adjusted.
Yeah, we're very well adjusted.
We're stable people. Yeah, but I think that's a really good point. And in terms of, in your case, you're a discovery writer. For someone who might be more like outliner into plotting and whatnot, how might they approach finding the emotional core while they're sort of building the story out at that stage? And then in your case, and for every author, when they kind of elevate the story to, okay, first draft is done, now I've got to revise it, now I've got to work through revisions, second draft, however many drafts you want to do, however many feels right, refining the emotional core through that process as well.
Yeah, I think if you're kind of planning and plotting and things like that, which every writer does a little bit of it. I think it's a spectrum. I don't think anyone's like 100% like just like a large language model who's just putting word after word to see it and seeing what happens, right?
With the advent of AI, hooray.
Yeah, exactly. And even people who plan everything out completely are going to deviate to some degree, right? So you're somewhere on a spectrum. But I think taking inspiration from, there's something very, I'm fascinated by, and you'll see it in a lot of my books. I'm fascinated by storytelling in myth and in kind of cultures and the way that cross over with one another and the similarities, and the way that they, I feel like, reflect something fundamentally and essentially human. Because for me, I feel like what I try and do in my writing, and I suppose another way of finding the emotional core, right, which is I think part of the journey of writing, is what we're doing through storytelling is we're trying to reach the most kind of human part of ourselves. We're trying to really explore what it is to be human, what that human experience is, right? That's what storytelling is all about. And so if you look at classic myths across cultures, the ones that have sustained, the ones that have kept going and have been told again and again and again, there must be something in them that is quintessentially human, that is important to us as a human species, that resonates with us as a human species. And looking at those as kind of plot inspiration, like Greek myths is absolutely full of them. And I don't mean go and like copy them, but feeling the kind of the mythic feeling of your story, in the sense of, are you telling a Paris and Helen like Fall of Troy story? Are you telling a an Oedipal story? Are you telling a sacrifice story, an Antigone story? Are you like what kind of story are you telling? And looking to kind of other mythological stories to see where those go and what their rhythms are and what their kind of plot beats and their movements are. And I think doesn't necessarily mean copying it. You can subvert it. You can do your own thing with it. But I think it's a great place to take inspiration from when to see kind of emotional journeys, because I think there is something really resonant about them to the human experience, and something that still lands with people today.
Yeah,
Well, and kind of building off that idea of plot beats, how does your understanding of the emotional core affect like the structure of the story as a whole from beginning to end and everything in between? And like you really like to play with structure too. So
Yeah.
how do you convey this?
I think like I said before, it's the central starting point, and I think that everything is built around, okay, for the structure of an initial character, it's always, the next thing is always, okay, what would the emotions of this character, of what they want, of what they need to explore, what would it force them to do? What would they do in this situation? Well, that takes you into the next scene, and that propels you forward there. And if you feel like that there isn't something in that moment that they must do, right, that's when you put the clamps on them and you put them in a position of tension. That's when you kind of start to torture them a little bit, and put them in a position where there is something that they must do. And so I think in plot points, I'm always coming back and I'm looking at like that emotional journey, what they need, what they want. And I think if your character has a really strong emotional core, there will always be a sense of, it should be relatively obvious in that moment to both the reader and to the writer what they absolutely feel like they must or need to do, right? And if it's not, I think you're missing something to some degree. Now you can throw obstacles in their way. That's part of the joy of storytelling, right? And muck it up, right? But their journey should be relatively obvious to them as a character, and or at least to us as a reader, even if it's not to them as a character all the time. So I think that's key. And then in terms of kind of broader structural elements, it's just like looking for opportunities to play with things thematically so readers see different perspectives of those same emotional journeys. Like if you can, or if you're doing multi POVs, then you've got multiple kind of emotional cores happening at the same time. It's not just one, right? But the characters are still being led by their emotional through line. And you're looking for something that's you're always just looking for something that's going to cause the reader to empathize closely with and resonate with an experience, a human experience that the character is going through, no matter what your setting is. Even if you're in a completely distant fantasy land, or you're 5,000 years into the future, or wherever you happen to be, an experience that a reader can go, I felt like that a bit at some point, not exactly like that, but enough like that. And which is why I kind of hate the phrase like relatable characters. Like, we need to have relatable characters, as if all characters need to be like, because I think people misinterpret that. They think about character attributes or character demographics or things like that. Like, oh, we need a relatable character. They need to be like a similar age or have a similar job.
Ticking
like,
boxes, basically.
Ticking boxes. All of that is nonsense, right? I think what makes characters relatable, they can be any characters. They can be even non-human, whatever you want to be, is that they are feeling emotions that we at times have felt. And I think the best literature, the very best literature of all, is literature that puts an emotion on a page that you as a reader have felt but haven't been able to put words to yet. And then the author puts words to them and you go, yeah, that's it. I felt that before, but I've not been able to express. I haven't had the language to be able to express it. And I think when that happens, that's the moment of magic where you sink into a character and you sink into a story.
Yeah, it's the emotional resonance.
Yeah.
That moment where you're able to really connect on that visceral level that is subconscious. And we did a masterclass with Jim Butcher back in 2023, where he kind of laid out, because we've been talking about structure and how emotion plays into structure, and his masterclass was on impactful scenes and sequential storytelling. So how you lay out scene to scene to create the larger corpus of a novel, and how that even transcends from a novel to its sequel or across a series, what have you.
Sure.
But on a scene to scene level, he broke it down as like different sort of resonance points where it's like your character's reacting to something on an emotional level because that is like our base instinct, right? Yeah. And then they go into a stage of reason and sort of reasoning with their emotion to use logic and kind of figure out like, why did I react that way to X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
And then review, where they kind of review their logical conclusions and then make a decision based upon that. And so a lot of humans kind of go through this a lot. It's like, Greta and I know as parents, a lot of the times you can just emotionally react to things on like a very instinctual and a very sort of rapid, unconscious
like it's almost
level.
knee-jerk response to
exactly.
something. Yeah.
And you don't really know why you reacted that particular way.
Yeah.
But then you go into sort of this moment of reasoning, using your logical mind to figure out like, why the fuck did I react that way? Or like, how can I kind of like reconfigure this situation to make it better, right? Characters can do that. And on a scene to scene level, how might, or from chapter to chapter, how might people think about the progression of someone's emotional reactions to things and how that reflects their emotional core?
Yeah, I think it's the progression is all about it's about you finding the character finding out. There's the classic kind of like advice that you want characters to think that they want something, and by the end of the story discover that that's not actually the thing that they want, and that they actually wanted something else all along, or they needed something else all along. And it's a good framework to hang, because that happens a lot of the time. But I think it's a lot of the time it's a process of discovery about your own emotions, and I think that you do that as whatever emotional resonance points you have through the story. You do that through the character's understanding of their relationships with other people. So as a character goes through the book and they have a sense of who they are and what they want at the beginning of the book, and the beginning of the story, as that sense of who they are and what they want is challenged by their relationships with other people, that's going to force them to kind of reassess what it is that they think they want and what it is that they think they are. And I think you do that enough and you dig down to a core of change. I mean, stories are fundamentally about change, but the change needs to be an emotional change that kind of sparks off that journey of self-discovery, really. And there are lots of different ways to do that, like so many different stories, whether you want to go darker with it, and have a character kind of lose someone that they loved for whatever reason and explore how that's going to impact them, or someone leaves them, or find somebody that they loved that they didn't know that they loved, or for whatever reason. All of these different things are going to make a character feel different about who they are. But I think the key is like those points of tension for me need to be built around the relationship that the character has with other people in their lives. And I think, and understanding why they react emotionally in a particular way. I like Jim Butcher's idea a lot, and it's rooted in a lot of kind of scientific theory. There's this wonderful theory called the somatic marker hypothesis, which is essentially that, and is essentially this idea that almost all rational thought that we have and almost all rational decisions that we have are created post hoc after we've already made the decision emotionally, and then the brain rationalizes what we've already done and comes up with a kind of step of, oh, this is why I did it, even though that's not why you did it, you've made it up afterwards.
Again, memory is fallible.
Memory is it's crazy.
They did split-second increments.
They did this crazy experiment with don't ask me why I know this, but they did this crazy experiment with people with corpus callosotomies. So it's when the left and right halves of their brain were severed and worked separately, where they'd kind of show one half something and tell it to do something. And like it would say, like, you know, they'd show it like a piece of paper that would be like, draw a smiley face. And so because like one side connects to the other side, with the other side they'd like draw a smiley face, and then they'd ask the side that hadn't seen the image that said draw a smiley face, like, why did you draw a smiley face? And they would answer completely, like, then completely believe it. They'd be like, oh, just because I was feeling really happy and that's what I wanted to draw, you know? Like, because they would have seen that their body had done something that they didn't understand, and the brain would just have rationalized it by going, I will come up with a reason that I did that. You know, so the brain's primed to do this, and it does it all the time. Which is crazy. And so, yeah, the starting point is always it's almost always the emotion that we then apply reason to. And I think it's really interesting sometimes to explore how characters don't fully understand the emotional reasons that they do things until much later. I think that's a really interesting journey that a lot of books have, that moment of realization where you realize why someone's done something. The classic example of this, it's a wonderful book, and I would recommend it to anyone who just wants to learn more about the art of writing, even if it's not SFF, but like just it's a masterclass, is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro.
So good, man.
Wonderful. And yeah, that whole book, right? The whole time he's telling us that, like, oh, you know, I want to go on a journey down south, like, because it's good to get out of the house a little bit. Oh, I might, I might pop in and see this old friend because maybe we need to hire a new cleaner or whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. And like slowly you start to realize, like, no. What's happened is you've just found out that the woman you loved is getting married, and you are making a trip down there to get her to not to do that. Like, that is the only reason you are taking this trip. You're just spending the entire book giving excuses about other reasons, right? And you're never admitting it to yourself. And the real tragedy of that book is that he can't even do it. He gets there and he chickens out. It's super sad. But yeah, I think sometimes a character's, like, revealing a character's emotional core over time. If you have to know it as an author, but that's a journey as well. Like, that's a plot journey of, like, them coming to an understanding of why they have done things. As the book goes on, can be a real powerful moment of emotional resonance, right? And we as a reader can go on that journey with them.
100%.
Well, speaking of characters that are fallible, like everyone is, like people are, and changeable, how malleable can this emotional core be as the story progresses? Have you ever come across a story where the emotional core just, like, completely flipped and they pulled it off well?
Yeah, I think people are very changeable. I think as long as there's justification for it, I don't think people ever completely flip. Like, sometimes you see, like, people trying to, turn people into villains in stories, and then they suddenly go flip and go megalomaniacal out of nowhere.
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. But what was really sad about that is they went to use Game of Thrones as an example, right? As the TV show, is that was a perfect example of writers who completely ignored the emotional core of their character, and that's why it didn't work. Because it's not that I couldn't believe that Danny would get a bit, like, obsessive and mad in all of these kinds of ways. It's that they had spent whole arcs of this character being like, I am freeing the slaves, I am looking out for the little guy, I am, like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, sure, I will fight and I will kill, but I am doing it in the name of, like, breaking the wheel and killing the masters and all of that kind of stuff.
And then all of a sudden, burn.
And then suddenly I'm just gonna burn. Not like, if she just went and burned, like, all of the Lannisters, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Instead,
Or
she's just like, no, I'm just going to burn all the villagers. I'm just going to all these poor villagers who I've spent the last however many seasons protecting. Like, I just killed them all. And it's just like, but that's not something your character would ever do. That makes no sense. And so that the reason that hit so many people poorly, I think, is just it was an utter betrayal of the emotional core of who that character was. And
because it wasn't malleability in that case. It was just like complete breaking of what that character was and what they were about.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think you can be malleable, but you have to do it. You have to do it over time, and you have to do it gently, and you have to like that. That's the arc of the story. I don't think you can just turn around and just take something that you've established as a core part of who that character is and just be like, well, I'm going to turn that on its head, and they're not going to be like that anymore, you know? Then your story loses any sense of authenticity. And then I think also the thing that connects us to that character, which is the most important thing, that resonance that we have, though, that character and that empathy, that also gets taken away. And so we stop caring about that character anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because it's all about building up expectations. It's like the character is establishing sort of like themselves in the eyes of the reader over the course of a story. And so it's like a buildup of expectations and emotional promises.
Yeah.
That the character is conveying to the reader, these are things that are important to me in my arc. And then you get to like the climax or the ending of a story. And the hope is that those emotional promises and expectations that have been established are fulfilled in a satisfying way.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of view the role of the climax and the ending to not do what happened with Dany Targaryen and instead be something that is satisfying based on the expectations and most impactful based on the emotional resonances that have accrued?
I think that what I try to aim for in my climaxes, and what I enjoy reading in climaxes of other stories is just an emotional choice of some kind that feels utterly authentic to who that character is at that point. And it might be something that they've been working on for most of the story, you know, and building up to. It might be that a great example, a really, really good example of this, in what is usually like people usually describe him as more of a plot focused writer, but I disagree with that completely. Is at the end of The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. There's the end of Kaladin's story arc at the end of that, right at the end of the book, which involves him doing something that at the beginning of the book he would never have done, right? Which is I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't read it. But it involves the character doing something that he would never have done at the beginning of the book. Absolutely would not have happened. But because of the points of tension and the emotional things that have happened to him over the course of the book, it makes sense and it feels authentic. And it becomes a real moment of choice and of development, you know, within a really cool, huge battle scene. But the cool, huge battle scene is meaningless without that emotional choice in that moment, right? And I think that's really special. So I think when you can really top off a book is having characters do things, or like a satisfying end to a character's emotional arc is them being able to authentically do something that they would have been incapable of doing at the start of the book, you know? And thinking about your characters going on that journey. What is it that they cannot do? What is it they would like to do but they are unable to do? And how do I get them to the place where a reader can authentically buy that they would be able to do that? Because you've put them through the right pacing.
Yeah. Well, winding down a little bit here. I mean, we've spoken a lot today about the relationship between a plot arc and a character arc. But what about other story elements, things like setting and world building? How can this emotional touchstone kind of be used in those story elements to enhance what the characters are experiencing?
I'm a big fan of like settings being reflective of character journeys, of like big settings being reflective of character journeys. I think they're fun to play with. And I think setting is sometimes something that the authors don't play with enough. And I think so. For example, like recently I wrote a book about, I've got a book coming out next year, which is a lot of the book emotionally is about the things that people bury deep down inside of them, and the things that people hide, and where, when they're going to come out, and how they're going to come out. And I've set most of that book underground, in a cave, because I was like, because it just felt like it matched that. And similarly, a lot of Ascension is about climbing and striving and trying to kind of be better than we are, right? And that's entirely set on a mountain, where they're climbing a mountain. And so I think those are quite kind of bold and obvious reflections of kind of emotional journeys in the setting. But I think you can do a lot with setting where you reflect the actual emotional journey in the setting that you choose, and in putting that in that setting. And I think that, I think it's something that a lot of authors don't think about enough. Particularly, I see a lot of like fantasy books where it's just like it's set in another, like, I don't know, medieval kingdom, and you're like, okay, could you do something a little bit more interesting? Could you do something a little bit more memorable, as setting that reflects the emotional journey, or reflects the emotions of the characters to some degree.
Yeah, it's like the people who inhabit this place, and the things that they're experiencing. We recently chatted with C.L. Clark, our friend Sheree, and her series, Magic of the Lost. It's set in a kind of sub-Saharan inspired fantasy nation that has been colonized. And so it's really the setting, that nation, that city is reflective of the people and the struggles that they're going through in terms of being colonized by a foreign power.
Yeah.
When the environment itself is so oppressive, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like this double play of like these people who live in an oppressive environment with all the inherent weather and what have you, but also reflected in the themes of colonialism and whatnot, and how that kind of fits into it. So I think there are a lot of like interesting layers that people can play with when it comes to how a setting. It doesn't have to be like, we were talking about recently, Greta, I can't remember with who, but like, oh, it's like they're sad, and so it's raining and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Or like, like so and so finally kiss and there's fucking butterflies and rainbows. There are ways to be subtle about it. But I think it is interesting to play around with setting and the actual facets of your world and how that can reflect the emotional states and motivations of your characters.
But I think also when you're playing, like, especially when you're playing with SFF, and you've got the only limits to your imagination, and you are literally the god of the world that you are writing. There's ways to be subtle about it, but there's also ways to just be really bold about it. Like, if part of the emotional journey of your characters is exploring, I don't know, sadness, sure, give me a setting where it never where it only rains, where rain is the only thing that exists at all
Blade
times.
Runner.
And see what that does to the characters, and that, like, I think you can do so much. You can do so many interesting things. You can that so often people just revert back to settings that are kind of familiar and comfortable, because that's where they can easily picture characters. And I think setting can do so much more to your characters and bring so many other points of tension if you just get a bit more weird with it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point to end on. Get weird, people.
Yeah,
that's been my motto ever since I published Mushroom Blues. Like, get weird.
100%.
And that's it for this mini masterclass on the emotional core and our two-parter with Nick. Thank you so much, buddy, for digging into this emotional heart of storytelling with us. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, guys. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. As well, if you contribute $5 to our Patreon, you can get an exclusive reading by Nick from Dissolution, which you can pick up now. You can also go check out Ascension and Professor Everywhere. And then out in September is Nick's, it's a novella, right? Extremity. Yeah. So Extremity's out in September. You can check that out as well. Nick, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Blue Sky, or you can find me on my website, which is nicholasbinge.com.
Perfect. And you can find SFF Addicts all across the board at SFF Addicts Pod. You can find me at Adrian M. Gibson. And if you want a little bit of fungi in your life, you can go check out Mushroom Blues, with a lovely foreword by Nicholas Eames and then a very dark story to follow. Greta, what about you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Greta K. Kelly. And of course, you can find Queen of Days anywhere you buy books.
Awesome. And that's it for this week. Thank you all for listening. For now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.